Welcome back, everybody. It's Rodrigo Fonador with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. Really excited about today's episode. We're going to be talking about the affordable housing bond. And honestly, I don't know too much about it, so I'm not going to make a big attempt to introduce it, other just to say that we got two guests here in the studio today from the city. So we're going straight to the source on this, and hopefully we're going to just get some more information out there, try to start this conversation going, and give you some information about to where to go to find some more info on this topic if you want to do the research yourself. And I believe there's a community event coming up in May, so we're going to give you some information on that if you want to show up to that in person. Before we get into the episode, I want to remind everybody that this episode, like all of our episodes here, is brought to you by American IRA, LLC. They're your local IRA custodian for any of your self-directed retirement needs. But without further ado, let me introduce our guests to the show today. It's Paul D'Angelo and Nikki Reid. I'll just let you guys kick it off. If each of you want to just share like a little bit of background on who you are, how you got to Asheville, and then what your role is with the city, that'd be great.
Sure. My name is Nikki Reid, and I serve as the city's real estate program director. And I've been in that role for the past, at least the past 10 years now. And I actually grew up in Hendersonville, so I consider myself a local. I grew up in Hendersonville, and then I went to college at UNC Asheville. I studied environmental policy and economics, and then was in the private real estate world for a couple of years after college, and then was fortunate enough to find myself working for the city and have been there ever since. So I manage city-owned property. So that's any properties that we have in our portfolio that, where we place fire stations, where we place police stations, parks. I was also involved in the River Arts District project, buying all the right-of-way that was needed for that. I was managing that component of the work. And then really now a lot of my work plan is partnering with the Community Development Division of the city, and that's where Paul comes in, on how we position city-owned property to be developed for affordable housing. And so I'll let Paul kind of share
Good segue,
who
yeah.
he is. Yeah.
Thanks, Nikki. So Paul D'Angelo, I am the Housing Development Specialist with the Community Development Department at the city. I've been there about 15 months kind of as the affordable housing expert. I've worked background with the public, private, and nonprofit side of affordable housing, which is a great background to have when you're working for a city to kind of understand the issues from many different sides. And before this, I was in Atlanta and Wilmington. So my goal was live in a big city, live at the beach, and then live in the mountains. So that's what brought me up here. And it's interesting because Wilmington is very similar to Asheville. It's almost like the Asheville of the water and the beaches, because similar things with a great quality of life, a great place to live, but with lower income service jobs, difficulty with housing prices. So it's great to be up here to offer solutions to what we're doing up here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much for you guys being here as well. And as I mentioned, this is our first episode with two guests at the same time, and we didn't know it was possible, and we started looking into it because we wanted to have both of you guys on, and we're like, all right, we're going to have to upgrade things. And so, again, really excited to have you guys on the show.
It's awesome.
Well, let's talk about the affordable housing bond and start with, I guess, a really basic overview of what it is, and let's just start at the top, and we can kind of get a little bit more detailed as we go.
Great.
So I'll jump in. I think it was November of 2016, thanks, Nikki, where $25 million housing bond was passed by the voters of Asheville, along with a couple other bonds with Parks and Recs, et cetera. $25 million was set aside for affordable housing, and it was kind of put into a couple different pots of money, but $15 million of that 25 was set aside for high-impact sites, which I think we'll talk about, South Charlotte Street, 319 Biltmore. The other $10 million was divvied up between the Housing Trust Fund, the creation of a community land trust, down payment assistance, which I think we'll also talk about, and potential funding for land banking as well, with the city land banking for potential affordable housing.
So when we talk about affordable housing with the citizens of Asheville and beyond, what we talk about is how the city plays in that arena, so to speak. And the bond really helped to provide additional resources for the city to get involved with the affordable housing crisis in our area. And so what the bond meant is that it was a dedication of city land to be used to position for affordable housing, as well as incorporating more resources, so more money into existing programs that the city has, where the city acts as a lender.
Okay.
So that's two of the main roles that we, that I guess capacities that we act in when we go to help affordable housing take root here in Asheville.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a lot of money, and that's, I mean, a lot of land. That's also, it's got some pretty big ramifications depending what happens there. Curious, though, before the bond, what was the city's ability to get involved in affordable housing, or what was their perspective on it? It seems like now you've got some resources, so it's like you got some vision, you can kind of play it out. But before the bond was in place, what was, the city's role and what is it now? And then also, do you mind just defining affordable housing? Because it gets thrown around a lot. Anytime we use it, I'm like, all right, let's define it for at least this conversation.
Sure, you want to start there?
Yeah, with the definition, I mean, the standard definition with HUD, which is Department of Housing and Urban Development, is that no one should spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing. So if you're a homeowner, that should be for your mortgage, your property taxes, and your insurance. If you're a renter, that's going to be your monthly rent as well as your utilities that you pay for your property that you're renting. So that's kind of the standard definition, and that 30% is if you're paying more than that, you're considered cost burden. And many folks in our community are paying even up to 50% of their gross income on rent or their mortgage, which means you're severely cost burden. And there's some really interesting data that comes out yearly from HUD and also from some great organization like the Harvard Joint Studies for Housing, which really can pin down those numbers to show, right now in Asheville, probably more and more people you're seeing are cost burden, and that does include the homeowners as well as just the renters.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that was a great definition. Thank you. So city's role, was it any different before the bond money came in then?
So, and I think this might be a question for Paul, but so the existing programs that the city has, again, the city acted as a lender in that capacity, where we have our housing trust fund. So that was actually resources from the city budget that were directed towards a trust fund that would invest in existing projects so long as the affordable housing return was there. So that's where we historically had a lot of our partnerships with Mountain Housing Opportunities, for example, and others like Kirk Booth, I know that you talked with earlier. And so between the Housing Trust Fund, and then there's federal programs too that the city manages that are federal entitlements. So these are funds, and now Paul, I'll let you kind of take the lead.
Sure. So when it comes to building, any type of housing or particularly affordable housing, one thing we're trying to do right now, and it bleeds back to what we did in the past, is it really takes those partnerships with developers. And there's usually like three types of developers, where there's tax credit developers, which kind of mission-driven to partner with the state's finance agency, where they get funding and they can match it with some of our funding to build affordable units. And then we also have mission-driven housing developers. That could include the Housing Authority, Mountain Housing Opportunity, Habitat. So we've got those developers as well. And the third wheel of that is really the for-profit developers. And the Housing Trust Fund, like Nikki mentioned, is kind of one of the tools out there where we're creating some of our own banking money where we can lend to the for-profit developers and the other developers as well to incentivize and encourage some level of affordability in the units they build. Tax credit developers are great. Mission-driven developers are great. But there's only so much capacity that's going to be in those two wheelhouses. So we're really trying to use the city tools to attract more for-profit developers. So not only with that Housing Trust Fund, but also a tool that's called the Land Use Incentive Grant, which is property tax abatement. And based on a scoring criteria, you score some points. Those points turn into years of property tax abatement. And then you pay your city property taxes based on this new building that you've put up. But that will be granted back to you based on that land use incentive grant and the formula that we put together. And right now, the big thing that the city is doing is really analyzing both the trust fund and the land use incentive grant to see if it's enough of an incentive to attract developers, and in particular, more of the for-profit developers that we need to see at the table. What encourages them to make 20% of their units available to folks making 60% of the area median income for 20 years? What do we need to do to meet them at the table with our incentives? And as Nikki also mentioned, we have a couple of federal programs, which is the home funding and this CDBG funding, but particularly the home funding is used for the construction of new rental units. So we've got that as another tool. So in our strategic vision, we're trying to align all of that, work with the developers, the tools that we have, the units we need on the ground, the levels of median income we need to service. And then now we have this $25 million, which hopefully will give us that extra push we need to maybe make more things happen.
And I think, and before the bond as well, we did have some instances of selling city-owned land for affordable housing developments to be built.
Right.
So I can think of in the Brotherton area, I think the city sold some acreage to Habitat. This was right when I first came on, so this was several years ago. But it was a sell to Habitat where they built single-family homes, and the city sold the land and structured a deal so that affordable housing could be achieved, right? So we've done that in some instances with our city land, but I think now we're seeing a much stronger push and also having additional resources to make the land available too. So kind of evolving into a more robust program.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's pretty exciting. Lots of moving pieces, so thanks for your guys' work on that. I'm sure that's a lot. Can't even imagine how all of those come together as well. That must be fun conversations.
Well, and in Nikki's department with real estate, and then partnering with us in community development, it's like, okay, now this tool of the city-owned land, and how do our tools work with her properties and vice versa. So it's been great to kind of include the real estate division in on this, because it's just a total piece that needs to be at the table.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing with city-owned property too. As we grow as a city, the way we've started talking about these affordable housing communities is really just that, creating these sustainable communities. So a lot of city land holdings are actually in really prime locations.
Great locations.
Yeah. and I think what now kind of thinking about our equity piece too. So over the past couple of years, the city has really wanted to position equity outcomes to be at the top of the policy initiatives. And so that's interesting as you think about real property, because that plays a huge role in how wealth has been disseminated, accumulated in America, like nationwide, So we've actually gone back through Asheville's history to understand what areas were the subject of redlining in the past. There's the urban renewal issues associated with, some of the city land holdings. So that's now become part of the dialogue as well, is what properties that we're seeking to redevelop, what is the history of those parcels, and how do they impact, our ability to make sure that we achieve equitable outcomes on those property redevelopments as well. So
Awesome. Well, it's really cool that you guys are going back and doing all that study and bringing it forward.
Yeah.
Wanted to kind of follow the money as far as breaking down, what all the moving pieces is, and start with the $15 million that you referenced. But real quick question, you mentioned median income a couple of times.
Yeah.
Do you know what that figure is off the top of your head approximately?
Yes, I would have to know that from my job. But the area median income for a family of four in Asheville is $61,300. Those are 2018 numbers.
Okay.
2019 numbers could come out soon. But that's for a family of four, pretty much for all of Buncombe County and the metro area of Asheville. And a lot of our work tends to go with folks making 80% of the area median income and below. And so I think for a family of four at 80% AMI comes in at around $48,000. So usually, based on the family size, and we have that data available on the website. And one quick thing, Rodrigo, is that, always that disclaimer about affordable housing. I think Asheville's a great example that gets this when it comes to affordable housing. But there's probably still some folks out there who might consider affordable housing to be public housing or some type of subsidized housing or something to that nature. And all of that housing is important to us in the affordable world. But, again, it's sticking to that budget. And I think, it's really great that most Ashevilleans recognize that, matching up your wage or income with the housing costs here is becoming more and more of a mismatch and more folks cost burdened. And one big thing that's always close to my heart is the fact that the more money people spend on housing, the less money they have for life's other necessities and to support your local economy, which is all really important. So if we can align the housing prices as best we can as public entities to be a part of that, if the market's not taking care of it, that's part of our job to try to see what we can do to make that work.
Yeah, no, I think that's super insightful. It's the ripple effect. You have less money to spend on everything else, and that's eventually going to circle back into the local economy.
Correct.
Which Asheville does a great job of supporting local, thankfully, which is, super important. Part of the draw, though, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's get into that. So let's break down this money. So it's $25 million, right? And then in the first $15 million is allocated to what then?
3 high-impact sites, and Nikki will probably address this.
So early after the bond was passed, one of the first things we wanted to discuss is what properties would we consider for potential redevelopment. So we looked through our inventory, and we selected 3 properties that we really wanted to investigate further and understand what could be built on the properties and and what kind of communities could be created. So, and those 3 properties were identified by City Council. They were the 319 Biltmore site, which is the former Matthews Ford site that everyone knows it as. And then it's directly adjacent, of course, to the Lee Walker Heights property that is set for redevelopment, really starting anytime soon. The other property is the 91 Riverside Drive site. So this is the old Ice House property in the River Arts District. So that was a vacant parcel that the city had bought prior to RAD TIP, and we just had it in our inventory as an unprogrammed piece of property. So we really wanted to see what kind of housing could be created. There were some other plans that had been done for the property in previous years, looking at development concepts and site design. So it was a good opportunity to really look closer at that property and see what affordability could be achieved there. And then the South Charlotte Street properties, of course. So the city owns property all the way from the ABC store, really all the way up the hill to City Hall on, I guess that's the west side of South Charlotte Street. Is that right? Yep, south. So the west side of South Charlotte Street. Again, that's urban renewal property, so that came through the urban renewal process. And so the city looked at, we basically drew a boundary of from the ABC store to the Fleet Management Building to where we have our city sanitation services, the Public Works E-Building there. So everything from South Beaumont really to Biltmore Ave. So those 3 sites we designated as high impact sites, really the moniker meaning that we wanted to achieve as much impact as we could with those bond dollars to achieve the best outcomes possible, be it in the affordable housing return and also just creating a sustainable community in some great locations in our city. And so so that was really, the $15 million was really carved out to begin that work of undertaking those properties to position for housing. And then you want to talk about the $10 million?
Well, I question on the 15.
Oh, sure,
so when, I mean, is there, my understanding, and I totally could be wrong, but is there not a time limit that the money has to be used?
There's a 7-year period for the bond monies to be spent.
And I mean,
well, there's a very specific language, and I'm maybe messing up a little bit, but it's to be allocated, right? So a 7-year
there is a timeline
period,
to either use it or have it
7 years for it to be drawn.
November, for something,
October, November 2023.
Okay, so these are really big projects undertaking any of those developments, and how is the timeline matching up with the availability? I mean, I think people typically look at anything done by the I-26. It's not Asheville, but it's that whole. We hear about it. What's the, I don't know, updates on when that may or may not happen? I know when we first got connected was talking about this a couple months ago. So,
and we certainly keep that timeline to the top of our minds. And so, because yes, it is what it is, right? And so we want to, the city really wants to, if we're going to participate in the affordable housing and the housing market in general, we really want to come out strong and show our community that they voted on this bond and we can demonstrate results, right? So that's staff's charge.
Right.
And so being very aware of that timeline, we designated those properties. And the first thing that we did is we really wanted to understand the return that we could get and really understand what it would take to invest in those sites to get the outcomes that would be considered an accomplishment, right? At the same time, achieving a vision, a plan for the site, a density on the site that would support that proximity, especially at places on like 319 Biltmore, for example, on, the proximity to jobs, being at the hospital, downtown. So really being able to create as much density as possible that's reasonable for that site, and while creating a great place to live within context, too, of the Lee Walker Heights. So really... We took about a year to do a planning study and a financial study as well to really ground our work in true financial realities, right? To understand, and again, this whole idea of the city participating in the housing arena, it's to make these properties available for private development, be it by a nonprofit or a private entity, but to make it available for a third party to actually construct the buildings. But with that comes what the banks, what their numbers are, what their interest rates are for those loans, for construction loans, what their equity partners, how much does the equity need return, all these different numbers that go into a development model. And then us trying to figure out, well, how can we use our bond money then to insert into those costs, that cost of a rental
Filling in the
product.
gaps almost, kind of.
Totally.
Yeah.
To figure out how to get those rents to be affordable. So that's the trick, right? Is that, we've learned a lot about how developers think and how they have to look at this business of creating housing, and it's based off of time, materials, costs, labor, and then an acceptable development plan, and
Cost of land.
all those
Topography
things.
challenges in Asheville.
And
Yeah.
To create,
stormwater.
absolutely, to create affordable mixed income communities, mixed use communities, which is what I think more folks want to see, where it's a place for everybody.
Yep.
There's a place to do business. There's a place to live that kind of fits all the incomes that are a part of Asheville.
No, absolutely. So, it sounds like, I know that was one thing I walked away personally very impressed is like, it looked like you guys had done a lot of work on the numbers. And you could, I don't even remember what all the questions were, but there was an answer to every question that was very much backed up by information, which I thought was really cool. But timeline-wise, is there any, breaking ground in sight, I guess is the specific question? And I know that's probably a really hard question to answer. Maybe it's unfair, but.
Not at all. I think so. Here's kind of where we want to see the property kind of come to be available, right? So that is truly our next step. Is that we, actually, we had to take care of one component of this work, which is to create a policy about how the city sells its land for affordable housing. So we are actually working on that right now. That is our one thing that we want to get accomplished by the end of the month. That will be our tipping point for making these properties available, like for
You
sale.
have guidelines then. Yeah.
But having those guidelines to say like, okay, well, when do we discount the property price? We do that when we achieve certain affordability goals, right? And so what are those goals? And so really establishing that so council can point to it and say, we did this deal to meet this. This is the criteria on which we would do this deal. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
And it's to bring developers to the door. So, to have a policy that's out there that's easy, simple, equatable to money. They understand the public good we're trying to get, especially when it's affordable housing. And if they look at that and be like, oh, wow, so they're looking for, 20% of the units at 60% AMI for 20 years, and they're offering land and their other tools, like, okay, we can perhaps work with those numbers, and then that gets them to the door to start those conversations to where we can actually start looking at areas, particularly 319 Biltmore, which I think of all the sites has risen to the one that's the most developable, the one that we could, spend the money in a reasonable timeline before 2023.
Yeah.
And so who would be interested in coming to the table with the piece of land on the table with some of our other incentives to get 319 moving sooner rather than later?
Well, I'm sure having something that's not a moving target helps, but we'll also build a lot of trust with the public, right? Because then you're like, oh, I know what the agreement was, right? There's clarity and there's
And the other thing
transparency
too
there.
is just procedures.
Yeah.
So, for example, the city gets appraisals on its property to sell, right? So we get simple things like that we want to just make sure are captured.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And also defining the process that we use to sell our land. So we're not going to go and just stick a sign on the front door. It's more a matter of to do what we call a request for qualifications, where we basically publish a document that says, here is what we're looking for, and here's the type of qualifications that we want from a developer. Here's some of the experience that you would need to bring to the table, and please respond to this written invitation. And so, just formulating that in the policy. And so, again, we're hoping to get that through council by the end of the month. In fact, we're doing stakeholder sessions this week and next. We have a committee that is a citizen committee, right? The Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. So they're going to be advising on that policy this week.
On Thursday, yes.
And then we'll go to our council committee, the HCD committee, and talk with them about the policy, and then hopefully go to council.
And so when it comes to spending some dollars, right now, I think it was City Council last week where we, with the agreement with Lee Walker Heights Development with the Housing Authority, that $1.82 million will go into helping to redevelop that site, and some of that work specifically going to be for the benefit of 319 Biltmore. So that'll be coming out of our affordable housing bond. And then if the city purchases the 319 Biltmore site for $5.3 million, so that would be 5.3, 1.82. So almost half of that $15 million is basically going to be spent. Now, whether or not we completely turn that purchase of 319 Biltmore over to a developer to say, hey, we're going to give you this land worth, $5.3 million, if that's what it all turns out to be in the final documents, then what can we get in return for that, basically, that we're
What's the
covering
value
the
exchange?
land.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we've been working with LAS out of Atlanta, Lord Act Sargent, and there's some great data on the website, to read some of these, some of the report. But that's shows half of our bond spending, and then how many units will we actually get out of that at the 319 Biltmore site. And right now we're estimating perhaps 90 units at 60% of the area median income could come out of that site in exchange for the money that we're putting into it.
Not to mention proof of concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which would be really exciting and big as well. So, let's keep following the money. So we talked about the first $15 million. What's the next chunk of money as we go through the affordable housing bond?
So we have $10 million left over of that money. So $5 million was set aside for the Housing Trust Fund, and some of that was talked about where that's kind of our own internal banking dollars. And we've been talking about this for a bit. Like, if you've got a willing city at the table and a willing developer at the table, and they have their partners for development, who's missing perhaps at the table? And a lot of times the banks are great, but there's no great loan program that if a developer is going to do some of their units for affordable units, is there not a better break they can get on their interest rate? A 50 point cut in their basis.
Right.
So how does that work? So the Housing Trust Fund comes into where we can work with developers, and lend money. $1 million, 1.5. I think the most we have awarded was 1.8. Where we lend that money to a project as part of their pro forma, to their balance sheet. And 0%, 1%, 2%. We work out those details that make sense for the developer, and then that becomes then a new layer that, oh wow, well, we're saving 5% based on what we'd normally lend during the construction phase. How can that work with all the other tools and all the other incentives that could then turn into affordable units? So that's exciting to have $5 million more go into the Housing Trust Fund. One side note, there's been a lot of talk about infill properties being developed. We've got about 3 developers circling right now who are looking at possibly using the Housing Trust Fund dollars as seed money to building a affordable home ownership unit, maybe between the price range of $175 to $225, $200,000 per unit, which is a great sales point for affordable, a great first-time home buyer house. And how can that Housing Trust Fund? So we're excited to see the conversations.
Very cool.
Again, as Nikki mentioned earlier, with the market of land costs and construction costs, labor costs, all of that materials, it's still tough for the developers to make those work, but we're excited about those conversations. So there's $5 million. $3 million was set aside for land banking. So that's another area where we need to come up with a policy, which I probably bring up to Nikki every 2 weeks. And I'm like, I swear I'm working on that. But a land banking policy to show that we're willing to put some of that $3 million into purchasing a parcel of land that could be later used for affordable housing. The issue with that right now is we're pretty much at the height of the market. And there seems to be some stabilization, but at the same point, looking at some recent sales, we're not seeing it. So it's money that we need to spend. It could be shifted around, but we're not chomping at the bit necessarily at the height of the market.
So the land banking is what I was going to ask for clarification, but I guess it is what I was thinking. You're just buying land, anticipating where growth might occur, so that you can own it down the road and have it as, for the same use that we're talking about with the forgot the word, but the high impact sites, right?
Yeah,
and this could be land next to city-owned land. This could be a parcel that makes great sense for affordable housing, and that includes in higher income neighborhoods where if more affordable housing was built, that neighborhood, this newly created affordable neighborhood, would have access to all those services that are already embedded into a higher income neighborhood. And for all your listeners out there, if they have a parcel of land and want to be a part of this this world of affordable housing and sell it to us at a great price, we do have that land banking funds out there. But right now, as I said, there is pretty high prices on some land that's come across our desk.
This might be a silly question, but do you guys looking just to buy inside of city limits, I'm guessing? Or are you guys exploring at things that are like close to city limits, touching city limits, or how does that?
With the affordable bond money, it has to be spent within the city. But it is interesting if there's a site that's contiguous to a city-owned site that could then be perhaps annexed into the city. And we've actually had a couple parcels that have been brought our way, and developers were letting them know, like, if they purchase that property and annex it in, there's a bonus for the city right there in property tax dollars, and then affordable housing on top of that would be a great bonus as well. So
interesting.
And then there's $2 more million in following the money. And so $1 million was set aside for the ABCLT, which is the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust. Okay. And if you're familiar with CLTs or Community Land Trust, it's really where the CLT in the basic definition kind of owns the land that the house is built on, and the buyer actually owns the house. So by nature, the price of that acquisition for that house is going to be cheaper by nature and more affordable. And so many communities have CLTs, and so we're excited to have that a newly part of our community. And right now they're working on capacity. They've got a board of about 15 or 16 people, and they're working on capacity on developing that affordable home ownership model that is permanently affordable. And it's really the best way if you're looking for home prices that are going to be permanently affordable. The CLT is really the best model for that. And right now, a great group of folks, a great board, but they're working towards capacity. And when we get to a point and we develop a policy, we'll figure out exactly how we'll get that $1 million where they could purchase land, they could purchase homes, and they've got some other really great creative ideas. And then last $1 million is the down payment assistance.
So I'm really curious about this. Let's talk about it. I have a question that I have an underlying question around it. And why don't you explain it first? That way we're all on the same page about what we're talking about. Maybe my question will go away, but.
Okay.
The down payment assistance piece?
Yeah.
So
what is it? How does it work? Why would you qualify? Just like the quick, maybe or not so quick overview, but yeah.
Well, again, hopefully you can see in the spending of these dollars and what the tools we already have is how we're really trying to, no silver bullet to affordable housing, but we're really trying to attack this issue at all levels. And a down payment assistance, we've already got some great local organizations that do it. But in that bond, they decided to set aside $1 million for a city-run down payment assistance. So $1 million was set aside for folks making 80% of or less of area median income, depending on family size, to actually purchase a home. And if you're under 80% of AMI, you can access up to $35,000 for down payment assistance. And if you're under 60% of AMI, which of course falls into that under 80, we did put aside half of that $1 million, $500,000, specifically for folks at 60% area median income, and giving them a little bit more time to build capacity to become homeowners, but they can access up to $40,000 in down payment assistance. And so that was the $1 million and the plan for that. And there's also the Community Heroes program in partnership with the Federal Home Loan Bank. And that is specifically a partnership where folks between 80 and 120% of AMI, in partnership with the Federal Home Loan Bank, community heroes such as police officers, firefighters, and school teachers can access up to $25,000 towards down payment assistance, falling between 80 and 120% of AMI to access for home ownership, again, within the city limits of Asheville. And those AMI numbers, I promise you, are on a city website. It's AshevilleNC.gov/down payment assistance, and you can find out additional information. And then that's where the funding is going in to hopefully purchase a home in the city of Asheville.
And real quickly, make sure I don't forget, when's your all's event? It's May 18th?
May 18th, it's Saturday, May 18th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., and it's kind of a mock home ownership center. And we're really excited about that. So we're going to have some of our regular nonprofit partners, our mission-driven developers there, and then hopefully bankers and lenders and real estate agents who really want to be a part of the solution when it comes to affordable housing. And the flyers online at that website I mentioned, and any banker, lender, or developer or real estate agent who wants to be a part of that, they just need to email me, and I'll hold them a table. We can have up to practically 40 tables in the room, and we kind of want to design it as a, you're interested in home ownership, and how does that process work? And myself and the partners are really excited about that.
Yeah. So I have a question on this. So, we have rental property I manage, and, a lot of people that are in the investing side that have property that they manage, right? And is there not a healthy barrier of entry for having a down payment? Or is there any concern at all that helping people get a down payment that can't necessarily afford one on their own is setting them up for failure down the road?
Well, that's a great question. And, in today's world, where you might need to have 20% of the down payment down to avoid your PMI or your private mortgage insurance, that's a lot of money. If you're looking at a house price of $300,000, I think the last year average price was about $325 in the city of Asheville. So you're looking at a down payment of about $65,000.
Yep.
And
if your median income is $60,000,
right.
It's hefty.
It's hefty. And so great question, because we've had those conversations in developing the policy because we don't want to set up an individual or family for any type of failure. And, with the discussion in the national data about so many folks just being one paycheck away from, being behind on bills. So we did try to create criteria in the underwriting using best practices that it is for the families making those income levels, but with the credit worthiness and with some perhaps a little bit of down payment system or payment assistance on their own, $1,000 that they bring to the table, as well as aligning their housing payment to 33% or below. So we tried to target some basic figures so that we were at least setting up the individual or family for success. But interesting discussion. Just today we were talking about HVAC prices. If you have to get a new HVAC and it's $8,000, how does that work?
So personally, I'm in real estate.
Yeah.
Been doing it for a long time, but I'm a renter by choice, and also just because I think it's what makes the most sense from a monetary standpoint. Because of that, having a very fixed cost on what your income is a really beautiful thing. The smallest thing can break at my house, I'm not paying for it. That's really special. And if you have a big cost come down the road,
right,
and you don't have the ability to put money down, arguably that means that there's an issue with your ability to save. So what happens, and also oftentimes when we buy houses from that exact same thing where somebody's not able to keep up with the deferred maintenance. And so then the house over 5, 6, 7 years, so then they get to the point where I have to sell because I can't keep up with my payments, but I also can't really take advantage of my equity because my house is in disrepair.
And right now, too, prices are kind of similar to land. Home prices are kind of at the height of the market.
Yeah.
So, amazing questions, Rodrigo, and stuff that we actually analyzed. It's funny, the day I left Wilmington, which was Sunday, January 21st of last year, I set up one more affordable housing meeting before I left town at 11 o'clock, and I got in my car at 12. And that was to actually meet with a realtor, a friend of mine down there, to be like, is home ownership still, the builder of wealth and the promoter of economic mobility that it's been? And, not that this realtor was the do-all, end-all, because there's lots of sides, but he was like, absolutely. So the city's DPA program really wanted to take a look at, for those interested in home ownership, and hopefully with the underwriting, and they've had those conversations with their family, they've done that homework, we're definitely interested in economic stability for folks who know the renter market there and even home ownership market, which can provide that economic stability. What your costs are. You're in that property. But there's still that American dream and that an economic mobility of trying to take advantage of it being such a great wealth builder. But it's a fine line. But I think what the down payment assistance wanted to do is really target those folks who've been working towards home ownership. They can't quite enter the market because they don't really have that down payment assistance, the extra money that they need to get in there, that the numbers could actually work, and they could be part of that economic stability to start, and then economic ability hopefully moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, or I understand the benefit of home ownership and whatnot, but it just seems like a lot of times most people are moving pretty quickly before they actually build up a lot of equity. And so it's not like there's a huge benefit of my grandparents' generation where they live in the same house for 40 years, so they do pay it off, and then they get 30 years of appreciation and whatnot. Very different than people are like, well, I bought my house 5 years ago, and how much is it worth? I'm like, yeah, you bought it at 2012. What if you bought it in 2007? You wouldn't be having the same experience when it comes to 5 years of appreciation. You'd be telling a much different story. And that's when it comes to on the rentals, that's why we have barriers of entry, because just because you can make the first month payment doesn't,
Right.
But I was just curious, because it is something that's being top of the market, getting into a house is too easy. what happens when, especially in this town like Asheville, where a lot of people's jobs, are fluid because you're in sales and in tourism,
right?
Which are fluid positions by nature.
And the average length of a home, someone actually owning a home is about 7 to 8 years. I think with the affordable, for folks maybe at a slightly moderate to lower income, I think it pushes 10 or 11.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, life happens, the type of economy we have up here. And, developing those underwriting standards, all while the things that you mentioned are in our head, is why I think it's so important for folks out there that might be interested in this program and being a homeowner to really take a look at the mortgage bankers and lenders in this community that work in the affordable housing loan programs in the world. Like NCHFA, the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, has a list of about 15, give or take, affordable loan experts that have worked with them, understand those programs. These lenders and bankers that are kind of dedicated to working with affordability, that I do believe bring up a lot of these issues and really take a look at that credit. And the other, thoughts and moving ahead in the future, like, okay, this is going to, take all your money in your savings account plus this extra additional second loan. But I think working, in coordinates with other programs, we could actually make this work.
Awesome.
It still sticks in our head, though, and we don't even know if $25,000, $35,000, or $40,000 is even going to be enough to help someone get into a City of Asheville home. But one great thing about working with the City of Asheville and with our management folks there is that they want to reevaluate this policy every 3 to 6 months. Is it working?
Wow, cool.
Is it enough? Are we loaning money? Is it working out for those families? We'll see how it goes. We are a little concerned that it's not even enough funding. And then if we start getting up to you need at least $60,000, then your questions that you bring up, Rodrigo, are even more prevalent.
Yeah, well, and I mean, obviously, you guys have thought about it, and it's been heavily discussed from what you just shared. So that's good. I just think that a lot of times when it comes to home ownership, that's part of the conversation that most people forget about, and
And we continue to encourage feedback. We don't know it all by any means. And so those types of things being brought up, and we're still getting emails from bankers asking if we've thought of this, that, or the other. We'll take all that feedback because we've thought of a lot, but probably not everything. And
there's a lot under the sun, right?
There really is. Now we have a lot going on over there with affordable housing, as you can see.
No, well, I mean, on that point, again, thank you guys for taking some time out on late afternoon to have this conversation. As we wrap things up, I just want to make sure we haven't missed anything. I don't know if there's something specific that either of you guys are personally excited about or passionate about that you want to share or just talk about that we maybe haven't spent enough time on, but wanted to kind of just give you guys, each of you, an open floor to touch on anything that's personally important to you.
Well, I think we're excited to see the policy go through. I think right now it's called Policies for Implementing Affordable Housing on City-Owned Land. That's what we've landed on. So, but hopefully it'll catch, pretty much our program of work of how we make our city land available for affordable housing. And then thereafter, we're really hoping to see things progress with the high-impact sites. So making 319 Built more available for requests for qualifications for developers, as well as 91 Riverside, and then continuing our work on South Charlotte Street. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Paul?
And I mean, for us, or for me, I'm always excited about how we're, trying to strategically, work on and attack this problem as best we can with all of our tools and our available resources and finances. And, it would be great. But again, we don't know everything. So if anyone's got a great idea about affordable housing out there, they can reach out to us at any time. Like I said before, if they had available land, if there's we've got great partners right now, MHO, we've got Habitat, and we've got the Housing Authority, who are really handling the lower incomes and difficult to house and doing a great job. And, we've got tax credit developers, but if there's for-profit developers out there who want to be at the table for this problem in our community and be a part of the solution, we'd love to hear from them as well to see if our tools match up. Infill development, we love having conversations with developers at all times, and we need more of them at the table to try to add more units to the ground. So if anyone wants to reach out to us at any time, we're available.
Well, yeah. What is your all's best contact information, or how does somebody actually reach out to you, and or maybe somebody just wants to read and get, figure out what's going on? Where do they do that?
Sure. To find out more about the City-Owned Land Initiative, you can go to ashevilleNC.gov/city property.
Okay.
And in fact, we have, our progress with studying the sites that we hope to redevelop, as well as we have a map-based inventory of all city-owned property. And that's
Cool.
an interesting tool to kind of play around with to see what sites that we're hoping to position for affordable housing, as well as just, the sites that we have we have, police stations, fire stations. It's just kind of fascinating to see everything that the city holds. I mean, when you think of watersheds, the city's one of the major landowners in Buncombe County. So it's neat to see it on a map. So, yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm not allowed to give my cell phone number out anymore, and so you can email me, which hopefully you'll be able to put up on the website.
We'll
But
put it on
Angelo at AshevilleNC.gov. But if they Google City of Asheville Community Development Department, we kind of try to break down not only what our department does, the affordable housing, a link to the city-owned website, a link to the bond funding website as well, so you can find out more information there.
And for the affordable or for the down payment assistance, that is, again, May 18th.
May
Do you need
18th.
tickets to go to that?
No,
Is it free,
it's
open
and
to
open
anybody?
to the public, and anybody who has an interest in affordable or in home ownership in general, whether they know nothing or they're a seasoned expert, everybody is welcome. And so we're excited to see if we can have a good Saturday event.
Cool. Awesome. Paul, Nikki, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It was a real pleasure, and you guys are super informative. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Rodrigo.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right, you guys, have a good week. See you all next Tuesday. As a reminder, first Wednesday of every month. Hope to see you all in person at our monthly meetup over at Archetype. Take care, everybody. Till next week.